Welcome to this segment. With me today I have got Danise Challis, who's the area manager in Western Australia for Singer, FAF and Husqvarna. Welcome, Danise.
Thank you.
And Danise today is going to take us through the project of making a stack and slash quilt and also embroidering it with the fancy stitches on your sewing machine. Now Danise is going to take us through the cutting of the stack and slash quilt. Danise, I believe we have our, is this fat quarters that we're using?
Yes, the idea is to start off with 12 fat quarters of fabric, and at the end of your project you'll actually end up with one piece of fabric in every block. There is a specific order of cutting and stacking the fabrics which if you follow that order will actually allow you to have those 12 pieces of fabric in each block. If you happen to mess it up, it doesn't really matter, because in the end nobody's going to come along and actually count individually how many pieces of fabric are in each block, which is a nice thing.
Yes.
The reason I actually designed this class is a lot of ladies want to get into the patchwork and they're very concerned about the rulers and the rotary cutters and being specific with their 1/4 inch seams, etc.
Right, yes.
And what this allows you to do is to actually not fuss too much about
the
accuracy,
yes.
but to have a good time with it. And then I would take them on and then teach them the real rules of patchwork.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But it's nice to learn how to use the equipment.
Yes.
And put together a nice easy quilt where there's not too much fussing with exactness of seams and meeting points and things like that. Yes, good.
Yeah. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is you're going to have your 12 fat quarters. Now they don't have to be fat quarters, but I prefer fat quarters because it gives me a bigger quilt.
Yes.
The 12 fat quarters will actually give you a single bed quilt approximately this size. You're going to stack them in any order that you want to, because it's very hard to predict how it's going to turn out. So don't fuss about it.
Do you tend to go into colour blocks at all, or use complementary colours?
No. Although I must admit, with this one here, I've gone through with my blues and yellows. And we'll see a few quilts later on where I've actually gone into my brights for the kids, etc.
Right, yes.
Yeah.
So it's a good way of actually dipping into your stash and using up some of that excess stash.
That's exactly what I did last night. So after stacking your 12 fabrics, then put a safety pin into the corner, right-hand bottom corner of every block. That will allow you to help keep the orientation of your blocks, so that when you finish with them, you actually turn them over like the pages of a book, and you shouldn't then, if you stick to that, you shouldn't get into too many problems. So the first thing we're going to do is take our top piece of fabric. Okay, so with my instructions here, the first cut that you're going to make is going to be at approximately this angle. There's no templates to follow. It's literally just looking at the pattern here and deciding what sort of angle and following that guide. It's just a guide. Okay, so we're going to take our first cut through here.
And when you are cutting with the fabric, it's important to use the correct rulers, isn't it? Because
yes, it
is. The depth.
Yes, that's
because
right.
It's quite easy with the rotary cutter for it to stray off.
Yes.
And go over a thinner ruler. So you really need the depth of that perspective ruler,
that's right.
don't you?
Yes. You do. So that's our first cut through here. We're going to now turn this one here, which we've taken from there, over, like the page of a book. Okay. I'm going to leave this template here because I'm now going to grab, I can probably cut through 2 or 3 of these at one time. So
you wouldn't advise going through many more layers than that, because your rotary cutter really won't handle it, will it?
No, and particularly if you're a beginner as well, it's very easy to slip, and we don't want any accidents because they can be quite nasty.
That's right.
Having seen a piece of my fresh fly across the room once.
No. It's not something you want to repeat, is it?
No, it's definitely not something you want to repeat. So you take your template from your first cut, make sure your safety pins are all in the bottom right-hand corner. Just line that up approximately. Don't be too fussy if your blocks haven't been perfectly cut in the first place. Pop your ruler down along that cutting edge and cut through those 2 layers. Okay, just going to put that to the side. these are now going to be turned over like the pages of a book. So they go there.
Right.
And that one's just come off the top there. And these as well, that's going to be very confusing, but you'll see the next one I'll get so perfect you won't even worry about it. So once again, we're turning them over like the layers of pages of a book.
So it is a pattern that is very forgiving, isn't it?
It is very, very forgiving. And I've seen some beautiful quilts from beginners who have never used a rotary cutter in their life before.
Right.
And they've been absolutely ecstatic with what they produce, because if you can actually produce this in a day, all 12 blocks, and if you're really firing along, you'd be able to do your sashing strips as well.
Right, and it's probably also a good quilt if you had a friendship group and you want to do different blocks and
Yes,
just pass
definitely.
it around. Yes.
Yep. So we're going to take that, turn it over like a book, take that and turn it over like a book. By the end of the day, you'll feel like you've read a book.
So really, if you keep track of where you're placing your things,
Yes.
then the quilt really does just fall together, doesn't it?
It does, it does. And that's why it is important to keep those safety pins in the bottom right-hand corner, because it just helps you retain the orientation of the blocks. Because it is quite easy to turn them. Cut through that one. Keep my first template aside. Take my pages and turn them over.
And of course, the fabric you're using is 100% cotton. That
Yes,
tends
it
to be
is
what
100%
quilters
cotton.
use.
Yes, that's
And
correct.
do you tend to wash your fabric beforehand?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Depends if you're going to be, I guess, using it a lot, and you know, like if you're giving it to somebody's child for a baby or whatever, and it is going to be washed a lot, then you would want to wash the sizing and that out of the fabric.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Would you wash it if you were using different types of fabrics, like a polyester and a cotton and maybe a velour mixed in together?
Personally, I wouldn't be using the polyester because it's too hard to sew with. But having said that, that doesn't mean that you can't try it.
No, that's right.
As I said, this technique is really not about the rules. It's about having fun and learning your equipment.
That's right, yes.
And, you know, you can certainly have a go with some polyester fabrics, etc. But if you go to a proper quilting class,
that's right,
you'll find that they will make you
100%
use
cotton.
100% cotton.
Yes.
Yeah, I've been experimenting with different fabrics.
Right, yes.
And you have to be a little bit more patient with them. They're not as forgiving as the cottons. I'm just going to take 3 layers there because that will finish it off. Move that down because I don't want to cut into the other one.
No. And of course, you could probably make these blocks a little bit smaller, couldn't you? If you were wanting to do smaller blocks, you'd start off with a smaller sized piece of fabric, wouldn't you?
Absolutely, by all means. Keep that one aside. Turn those over. Whoops. Nothing like a bit of free form cutting here. Look at that, nobody will ever know. Okay, so then what we're going to do is we're going to take our stack back, turn the pages back, turn this stack back, and then we're going to replace our first template on the top. So that they all line up now.
Right. Good.
So with this particular technique, once you've done your first cut, if you refer to the instructions, it will now tell you to take the right hand piece, pick up one fabric from the right hand piece and place that on the bottom of that stack.
Right.
And now we're going to continue on and sew all these together.
Good, all right. Well, we'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll be going through the sewing of the blocks together. Welcome back, and now we're going to continue with our project. Now, Danise, we've sewn some of the pieces together.
Yes, we have. We've done our first cut and gone through and sewn our bottom right-hand corners to here. And we've kept them in the order, haven't we, Suzanne?
Yes, we have, yes. We've been meticulous about that.
Yes, so then what you're going to do is go to your plan, your actual pattern, and you're going to make your second cut, which is this one through here. And it's a little bit off-putting because you're actually just going to cut through there. And it doesn't really give it much shape, but you can see that you'll end up with your nice five-sided piece in the middle in the end. So you take your first one from the top. Same as before, you're going to take your ruler and your rotary cutter.
Right.
Just wing approximately the pattern, the piece that you want.
Right.
Cut through that. We're going to keep that piece as our template. Yes. And as before, we're then going to use that to cut through all the other blocks.
The others, and sort of do 3 layers at a time.
Yep,
and
2 or 3 layers at a time, that's
now,
right.
Just one thing, when we were sewing together, we actually used 1/4-inch seams, which is the sort of norm for when you're sewing patchwork, isn't it?
That's right, yes it is.
Yeah, unless sort of stated in the pattern, it's a 1/4-inch seam. And also, when pressing, you tend to press your seams towards the darker fabrics.
That's correct, yes you do. Yes.
Because otherwise, if you do it under the lighter, once your quilt's completed and you see the lighter fabric, you can quite easily pick up the seams,
the dark
which is
colour
something
does
you really
show through.
don't want to have happen. So yes, press it towards the darker piece of fabric, yes.
With your 1/4-inch seams, just backtracking a little bit too, it doesn't really matter. I mean, once you start making the true patchwork quilts, you must use a 1/4-inch seam. But in this case here, it doesn't particularly matter, provided always that you use the same seam.
So you keep up your consistency.
Yeah, be consistent with whatever you choose to do.
So if you decide to do 1/2 inch, well then you need to keep that 1/2 inch going throughout the whole piece.
That's correct, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as we said before, we will have the instructions and the diagram on our website. Now, Danise, we have got some finished blocks that you've brought along from a previous project.
Yes, we do.
And of course, you realise once we sew them all together, the blocks are all going to be sort of mismatched in their sizing, and the side endings as well. Yes. So there's a tip to actually neatening these off.
That's right. Once you've sewn all your 12 pieces back together again, you do end up with 1 piece in each block. I know that they are there. But as Suzanne was saying, it is very difficult. You can't just decide that you're going to do cut them all back to the same size by measuring one block. They will all be different. So the idea is to take your ruler and to measure across the width and the height, and do that with all the blocks until you find the smallest one.
Yes.
And then once you've decided what the smallest size is, you then trim them up.
Down to that size.
Yeah, trim them down to that size, correct. Right. Yeah. So for example, this one here is 16.5 across that way, and my narrowest point here is probably 15.5.
Right.
So I'd go for 15-inch blocks.
Right.
And this one, so I'd trim that up. That's if they were all going to fit into a 15-inch block.
Yes. But as you go through the pile, you might come across something that's actually 14.5.
Yeah. Well, I usually actually go through them all first and check them, so that I don't have to go back and do them again if there is one that's a little bit smaller. But I'm going to throw caution to the wind here.
Right.
And I'm going to now take my square.
Yes.
And you want to try and keep in as much of the pattern as you can. And it is a very good idea to use a square 12.5 inch, or, I mean, if you're lucky enough to have different sizes, use something a little bit bigger.
Yes.
And then just trim your block up.
Right.
I'll just go across here. Whoops, just come over a little bit more. And then when you lay when you turn the block, and remembering of course that you want 15 inches, you would take, because this is only 12.5, you will need to take your ruler Measure your 15 inches, which would be about there. And I just pop that one down there on top.
Yes.
Might slip around a little bit. If you want to slip that one out from underneath, you can do.
Yeah, or you can put those sort of grip mats underneath and
That's
that
right,
would hold
yes.
it.
Yes, you can.
Yeah.
And then you just continue squaring your blocks
Squaring
up.
it off.
Yeah. And then once you've done that,
Right.
they will just take on a whole new life once
Yes.
they're all tidied up and trimmed up.
Right, and then they'll be ready for you now to start putting your bindings on.
Yes,
your
that's
sashings
correct,
and
yep.
bindings.
Yep.
Yes.
When I put my squares, when I decide the order that I'm going to lay them out in, I usually put them down on the floor, spread them all
Yes.
out, and just see what's pleasing to the eye. Feel happy, feel free to rearrange them, etc.
That's right, and often you can just leave that laid out for a while and you'll find throughout the time
Yes, that's
your
right.
perspective will change and you might find yourself coming back a couple of times
That's
and
right.
rearranging them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like
good.
you might see a whole lot of red in one place and you might want to break that up.
Exactly,
And
yes.
things like that. So, so that's how we plan that side
Good.
of it.
All right.
Yeah.
And the next step is to actually look at a completed quilt and how you're going to quilt it.
That's
Yes.
right. So, Suzanne, if you'd like to
Yes.
pass me that quilt there on the corner.
Right.
This-
Another nice bright one.
This quilt here has already been pieced together, and there's two techniques for putting a quilt together. You can do either quilt as you go or using your 3 layers, your quilt top, your batting and
Yes.
your backing. I tend to be a quilt as you go person. I just find it easier. And the other reason I like to do quilt as you go is that when you have finished your block, you could actually embellish all the seam lines with decorative stitching, like I've done on this
You have.
on
yes,
this
a lot.
quilt here.
Yes.
And in this case, what I did do was I put matching thread on the back so that it came through on the back side of the quilt as well.
So you've got a design on the back as well, a decorative back.
That's
Yes,
right,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
And it's a good way of trying out all the different stitches on your machine, isn't it?
It
good
is a very
excuse.
good. It is a
Yes.
very good way of doing it. So if we just
Certainly.
spread this out. Now this one's a little bit different to. I'd actually used more than 12 pieces of fabric.
Right.
And when I do these, I do have to play. It does take a long time to sort it out. I'm sitting there with little colour swatches or cards or
Right, yes.
things like that, and then I'm practice cutting and trying to work out the orientation of them. But the idea of this particular quilt was to have a pattern fabric, a plain, a pattern of plain, a pattern of plain.
Right.
And that's what I achieved, and I'm very happy, and I won't do it again.
But also, this has got great designs on it. You could almost do it as a nice spy quilt, couldn't
It
you?
is
for
a
child?
nice spy quilt would be
Stack and slash.
fantastic.
Yes, because you've got your little motors of frogs and animals and things.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's a great game you could
A
play
nice
with the
spy,
kids.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So this is actually doing your 3 layers, your quilt top, then your backing and your batting behind it. The quilting side of it would be, once you've sashed it together, would be just really to stitch down through some of the seams on the block.
Yes.
Or you could stipple it, whatever the
That's
choices
right,
you
yes.
wish to make
Or
with
if
it.
you don't want to do a lot of sewing, some people tend to use buttons and things to.
That
But you
it-
need to be
yep.
careful if it's a quilt for children.
Yes,
But
yeah,
maybe
yeah.
for an adult or something, you could actually, in combination, use buttons or little ties.
Yes,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. So there's a variety, but stitching with decorative stitching would certainly highlight some of the colours,
That's correct,
and
yeah.
you could use lots of sort of bling colours and things to really embellish it.
Yes,
Yes.
that's right.
Well, thank you, Denise.
That's
Thank you for
okay,
taking
you're
us
very
through the
welcome.
process. And as I said before, do refer to our website because the instructions and the diagrams will be on the website. Thank you for joining us today in episode 1 of series 3. I do hope that you enjoyed the project presented and that you do give it a try. Also, I hope you enjoyed going to Rose Street Market and meeting some of the store holders. Again, information regarding the market will also be on our website. We look forward to seeing you next week.